Imagine a young woman alone in a motel, standing under the hot stream of a shower. Suddenly, a shadowy figure approaches. The curtain is pulled back. A scream cuts through the room. And an invisible stab shakes the history of cinema forever. This is how one of the most famous scenes of all time was born. The shower scene in Psycho. But behind that curtain, behind every shadow, was the mind of a man obsessed with fear, suspense, and the power to control his audience until the very last second. Today, we're going to discover who Alfred Hitchcock really was. How his strict childhood, deep-seated fears, and dark sense of humor shaped a unique filmography that continues to captivate generations. This is the journey into the life and work of the Master of Suspense. Alfred Joseph Hitchcock was born on August 13, 1899, in Leytonstone, a neighborhood in northeast London that, at the time, sat somewhere between rural and urban. He was the youngest of 3 siblings in a working-class Catholic family. His father, William Hitchcock, was a greengrocer who ran a small shop, while his mother, Emma Jane Whelan, was a strict and deeply religious woman. From an early age, Alfred was quiet and shy, with a round face and curious eyes, more inclined to observe than participate. His weight and silence made him an easy target for teasing, leaving him feeling vulnerable and defenseless. Unable to control those who mocked him, he took refuge in his imagination, a private world where he decided who lived, who suffered, and who survived. This obsession with total control eventually shaped his directing style. Every shot, every frame, every audience reaction was meticulously calculated, as if he were projecting his mind onto the screen. His social isolation unknowingly became the seed of his genius for manipulating stories and emotions. One of the most defining moments of his childhood occurred when he was about 5 years old. After misbehaving, he never revealed exactly how, his father sent him to the local police station with a note. The officer read the note and, without saying a word, locked him in a jail cell for a few minutes to teach him a lesson. The experience left a lasting scar on his imagination. Decades later, Hitchcock would recount this story as the root of his obsession with guilt and paranoia, 2 recurring themes in his work.
Yes. And I was placed in a cell for 5 minutes. Now, psychiatrists say that if you can trace the origin of your fear, it will disappear. The whole thing is a confounded lie, because I still have it.
Hitchcock loved reading murder and mystery stories in newspapers, especially those about Jack the Ripper, whose crimes still haunted London's collective memory. He also developed a fascination with maps and train schedules, spending hours alone studying railway routes and planning imaginary journeys. This habit fed his taste for precision and obsessive planning. As a teenager, Alfred became interested in electrical engineering and technical drawing. After his father's death, when Alfred was only 14, he took on some financial responsibility, helping out at the family shop and working at the Henley's Cable Company, a manufacturer of electrical equipment and telegraph cables. There, he designed diagrams and advertisements for electrical products, honing his skills in drawing, typography, and visual composition. In the early 1920s, as British silent cinema began to grow, Hitchcock, fascinated by visual storytelling, was drawn to the film industry. Thanks to his graphic design abilities, he landed a job at famous Players Lasky, the British branch of Paramount Pictures, as a title card designer, those text slides used in silent films to explain dialogue or narrate the story. His talent and attention to detail quickly caught the attention of directors and producers. He began contributing to other departments: set design, editing, art direction, and eventually, assisting with scene direction. Curious and perfectionist, he observed directors, learned from technicians, and offered solutions to problems in staging and editing. In 1924, he traveled to Berlin as assistant director to Graham Cutts for the film The Blackguard. There, Hitchcock was deeply influenced by the major German UFA studios, and, above all, by German Expressionism, an artistic movement that used distorted sets, dramatic light and shadow, and unconventional camera angles to convey psychological states. he learned that a shadow or a tilted frame could speak louder than dialogue. This expressionist influence left a permanent mark on his career. You only need to look at the twisted staircases, ominous silhouettes, and dramatic lighting in many of his films to see that German legacy. In 1925, thanks to his proven talent and determination, he was offered the chance to direct his first film, The Pleasure Garden. Though not a major hit, it gave him the confidence to keep experimenting with visual and narrative techniques. In 1926, he married Alma Reville. She worked at famous Players Lasky in a more senior role, as a script supervisor, assistant editor, and continuity expert. Unlike many of his colleagues, Alma understood the importance of technical precision and visual storytelling, the very things that fascinated Hitchcock. From that professional admiration grew a bond that soon became love. His next project, The Lodger, 1927, marked a turning point. Inspired by the Jack the Ripper murders, it combined his fascination with suspense with staging techniques inherited from German Expressionism. The Lodger was a success and established the formula that would become his trademark. The psychological thriller, the wrongly accused innocent man, and a tense atmosphere that gripped the viewer. Additionally, due to a missing extra, Hitchcock made his first cameo, appearing briefly from behind, a near-invisible detail that would become a lasting tradition in his films.
I took the first 10 minutes to show a piece of news and a body being dragged out of the River Thames, and how the reporter picked up the information, got on the phone. And then I showed what happened to that piece of news in all forms: broadcasting, wire service, scintillating running signs, a newspaper office, and so forth. But each time I added a piece of information about Jack the Ripper. Then I followed one blonde home to her house, and down in the basement, they're talking about it, and the lights begin to go down, slowly and slowly. And suddenly Mother says, "Dad, put a shilling in the meter, the gas is going down." So Dad goes with a shilling to put in the meter. By this time, the place is in darkness, and there's a rat-tat-tat at the front door. Mother goes up to open the door, and Dad puts a shilling in the meter. You can imagine, as the door opened, the gas came up. And there was a man standing with a cloak and a black bag, and obviously the Ripper standing there.
In 1929, he filmed Blackmail, the first British sound film. In it, Hitchcock played with sound as a tool for tension. In one famous scene, a woman who has committed a crime hears someone repeat the word knife over and over until the sound becomes unbearable.
Yeah, you would have been more careful.
Throughout the 1930s, Hitchcock developed his style of everyday suspense, seemingly ordinary stories that suddenly turn claustrophobic. The Man Who Knew Too Much, 1934, was an international success. In this film, an ordinary family is unintentionally caught in a web of espionage, conspiracy, and murder. The film was so successful that Hitchcock remade it himself in Hollywood 20 years later. In Sabotage, 1936, Hitchcock explored one of his most famous suspense techniques, the ticking time bomb. Instead of creating passive suspense, he showed the audience that there was a hidden bomb in a package, while the characters remained unaware. This technique, revealing the threat before it unfolds, became one of his trademarks for manipulating tension. The Lady Vanishes, 1938, was another major hit. Set almost entirely on a train, the film showcased Hitchcock's ability to turn a confined space into a stage of paranoia and conspiracy, building tension through glances, ambiguous dialogue, and mysterious disappearances. During these years, Hitchcock solidified his reputation as a director who could turn modest budgets into box office hits, catching the attention of major Hollywood studios. He also refined his personal brand. Brief cameos in his own films, dark humor amidst the tension, and the constant manipulation of audience expectations. In 1939, producer David O. Selznick, famous for Gone with the Wind, invited Hitchcock to move to the United States to direct Rebecca, an adaptation of Daphne du Maurier's Gothic novel. For Hitchcock, the contract with Selznick was a chance to play in the big leagues, with larger budgets, famous stars, and more room to experiment. So, Hitchcock and Alma packed their bags, closed their successful British chapter, and set off for Hollywood, where his legend would grow even further. In 1940, he directed Rebecca, his first American film. It blended gothic mystery, dark romance, and family secrets, all wrapped in the kind of psychological ambiguity Hitchcock excelled at. However, directing Rebecca was no easy task. Selznick, known for micromanaging every detail, often clashed with strong-willed directors like Hitchcock. While Selznick wanted a gothic love story, Hitchcock aimed to delve into the protagonist's mind, exploring the young Mrs. De Winter's paranoia, jealousy, and obsession with the deceased Rebecca.
I remember in the film Rebecca, the young girl there was brought to a big house. She was very scared. So naturally, when she walked into this big room, you made her small, deliberately, you see. In fact, to make her feel afraid, I even had a fan blow her hair slightly, even though the windows weren't open.
In 1941, he released Suspicion, starring Cary Grant and Joan Fontaine. The film returned to Hitchcock's favorite themes of marriage and guilt. A young woman suspects that her charming husband is a murderer, plotting to kill her. One of the film's most memorable scenes features a simple glass of milk. Hitchcock needed this everyday object to become a symbol of threat and doubt. He came up with a brilliant visual trick, placing a light bulb inside the glass, so that when Cary Grant ascends the staircase holding it, the milk glows mysteriously, in the dark, drawing the audience's full attention. This simple trick transforms the milk, a symbol of purity and innocence, into a possible weapon. As Lena watches from her bed, the audience shares her paranoia. Does the glass contain milk or poison? The image is almost hypnotic, a smiling man climbing the stairs with a ghostly glow in his hands. The film's ending was softened due to studio pressure. Hitchcock wanted Cary Grant's character to be truly guilty, but the studio refused, worried about tarnishing the star's image. In 1942, Hitchcock directed Saboteur, revisiting one of his favorite themes, the innocent man wrongly accused. The film tells the story of Barry Kane, an aircraft factory worker accused of saboteur after a fire breaks out. As he goes on the run, he must track down the real culprit. Saboteur features one of Hitchcock's most iconic sequences, the final chase atop the Statue of Liberty. For Hitchcock, it wasn't just a spectacular location. The image of a traitor dangling from the torch of liberty was a perfect symbol of the tension between national security and internal threats, a powerful message during wartime. In 1943, Hitchcock made one of his personal favorites, Shadow of a Doubt. Set in a quiet California town, the story follows Charlie, a young woman who begins to suspect that her beloved uncle, charming on the surface, is actually a killer of wealthy widows. To Hitchcock, this was his most American film, as it brought terror into the heart of everyday life. The threat was inside the home, disguised as a familiar smile. The contrast between suburban calm and hidden violence became a hallmark of his work. In Lifeboat, 1944, Hitchcock took on a radical narrative challenge, telling an entire story in a single confined setting. The plot begins with a group of survivors from a torpedoed ship stranded in a lifeboat in the middle of the ocean. As they drift, they must decide whether they can trust a mysterious German survivor they rescue from the water. Hitchcock wanted to prove he could build pure suspense and tension without ever changing location. He used the camera as a restless eye, trapping the characters in their floating microcosm. The limited space demanded flawless choreography between actors and camera, creating a stifling atmosphere. A famous anecdote. As always, Hitchcock wanted to make his signature cameo, but how do you appear in a lifeboat? His solution was brilliant and playful. He appears in a newspaper ad for a weight loss product that one of the survivors reads. It became his most creative cameo and a perfect example of his dark humor. In Spellbound, 1945, Hitchcock dove into the world of psychoanalysis, a topic that fascinated Hollywood at the time. The story blends romance, mystery, and repressed trauma. Ingrid Bergman plays a young psychiatrist who falls in love with a new clinic director, Gregory Peck, suffering from amnesia, and possibly a murderer. The film's most iconic element is its surreal dream sequence, designed by Salvador Dali. Hitchcock, always visually driven, chose Dali to create a dream filled with giant eyes, floating curtains, and symbolic figures. The result was a hypnotic scene that translated the subconscious into images, something few dared to attempt in cinema at the time. By the mid-1940s, Hitchcock teamed up with his friend and writer Ben Hecht to film Notorious, 1946. This film blended espionage, romance, and suspense in the post-war era. Ingrid Bergman plays the daughter of a Nazi spy who is recruited to infiltrate a circle of German criminals. Alongside Cary Grant, the film produced some of Hitchcock's most iconic moments, such as the famous 2-minute kiss, which cleverly evaded censorship by interspersing dialogue and movement to avoid breaking the 3-second rule. Another standout scene is the hidden key, captured through a vertical zoom that travels from a wide shot of a mansion down to Ingrid Bergman's hand clutching the key to the entire conspiracy. Classic Hitchcock, tension built shot by shot. Throughout this decade, Hitchcock perfected his working method, mastering studio sets, meticulously storyboarding every scene, and elevating his concept of controlled suspense to its peak.
In all suspense, the most important thing is to give an audience information. You cannot expect an audience anxieties without giving them the information to be anxious about. To give you a simple thing, a man is standing there, another man is creeping towards him with a raised hammer. Now the audience can see the victim and can see the attacker. So now they get anxious and they want to shout, "Look out!"
In 1948, Hitchcock took his obsession with control and tension to the extreme with Rope. Loosely inspired by the real-life case of Leopold and Loeb, two wealthy young men who murdered a classmate just to prove they could commit the perfect crime, the film explores one of Hitchcock's central themes: human arrogance and the guilt that inevitably surfaces.
And here's another interesting thing. Why is it that the audience are more anxious about the wrongdoer than they are about the person who might discover her?
But beyond the story, Rope is famous for its technical daring. Hitchcock set out to make the film appear as if it were shot in one continuous take. To achieve this, he planned the entire production like a film stage play. He used 10-minute film reels, the maximum length the camera allowed, and choreographed actors, camera movements, cables, and set pieces like a perfectly timed dance. When a reel was about to end, the camera would push in on a character's back or a dark object to create a seamless cut. The next take would pick up exactly where the last one ended. The shoot was a true puzzle. Every camera movement had to be precise. The sets had movable walls that slid away silently to let the camera pass. If an actor flubbed a line or someone tripped over a cable, the entire scene had to be restarted from the beginning. Hitchcock said filming Rope was like tightrope walking with a camera. One mistake, and everything collapsed. This experiment wasn't just a gimmick, it was a way to intensify suspense. With no cuts or breaks, the audience felt the constant pressure of the secret, the body hidden in plain sight, the ambiguous conversations, and James Stewart's growing suspicion. Although Rope wasn't a major box office hit upon release, it became a technical landmark and a masterclass in how Hitchcock manipulated time and space to focus the audience's attention and build tension. If the 1940s established Hitchcock as a master of suspense, the 1950s elevated him to mythical status. This was his most prolific and creative period, during which he filmed several of his masterpieces and experimented fearlessly, always pushing the boundaries of cinematic language. Strangers on a Train, 1951, revisits one of Hitchcock's favorite themes, the double and the exchange of guilt. A young tennis player is approached by a stranger who proposes a murder swap. "I'll kill your wife if you kill my father." The iconic scene at the fair, with the fight reflected in a spectator's glasses, showcases Hitchcock's unparalleled visual precision. The idea that a crime can forever link two strangers reveals his obsession with shared guilt. In 1954, he directed Rear Window, inspired by his fascination with voyeurism, and the idea that we are all, to some degree, peeping Toms. Hitchcock confined James Stewart to a wheelchair in front of an open window overlooking a building's inner courtyard. Stewart watches, suspects, and reconstructs a possible murder story solely from fragments of other people's lives.
All from the point of view of one man, James Stewart, sitting in a window. Well, he had to look. Then I had to cut to what he saw, then cut back to his reaction. Now, what I was really doing was showing a mental process of the man by means of pictures, by what he saw.
Hitchcock built a giant set with 31 real apartments and synchronized actors and lighting to make the entire story feel alive. The film turns the viewer into an accomplice. Watching becomes irresistible, dangerous, and thrilling all at once. In 1958, Hitchcock released Vertigo, a film initially misunderstood by critics and audiences, but later recognized as one of the greatest in cinema history. The story revolves around Scotty Ferguson, a former police officer with a fear of heights, who is hired to follow a mysterious woman he becomes obsessed with. After her apparent suicide, he sinks into guilt until he believes he sees her again in another woman. Here, Hitchcock explores one of his most disturbing themes, a man's desire to recreate the ideal woman, molding her to his image and controlling her until her real identity vanishes. To express Scotty's dizziness and fear of heights, Hitchcock invented one of cinema's most famous and imitated visual tricks, the reverse zoom, or vertigo shot. This technique involves physically moving the camera forward while zooming out, or vice versa. The result warps the perspective, stretches the background, and creates a sense of falling, perfectly capturing Scotty's mental instability. Upon its release, Vertigo was a box office failure. The story was deemed too dark, too twisted. James Stewart, already in his 50s, seemed too old to play a detective in love with a young woman. Hitchcock was disappointed. It wasn't the first time audiences weren't ready to confront their deepest fears. Over time, Vertigo earned the recognition Hitchcock always hoped for. It is now considered an absolute masterpiece, a hypnotic descent into obsession and guilt, told by a man who made cinema his way of manipulating dreams and illusions. Hitchcock closed the decade with North by Northwest, 1959, one of his most iconic and entertaining thrillers. Once again, Cary Grant plays the wrong man, an ad executive mistaken for a spy, chased by killers across trains, hotels, and cornfields. The most famous scene, and one of the most legendary in film history, is the crop duster chase.
I have a very strict rule. Never put characters into a setting without the setting itself is used dramatically. Now the audience is saying, well, it's perfectly normal. What can happen here? There's not a sign of anything. The man said, that's funny, and Grant said, what's funny? There's a crop duster over there dusting a place where there are no crops. And before any elaboration, he's on the bus and is away. Yeah. So the audience are left alone with this first clue that something's wrong around here.
Thornhill waits for a contact in the middle of a deserted rural road, surrounded by cornfields. Instead of a spy, a crop-dusting plane appears and begins to chase and shoot at him from above. Hitchcock turns nothingness, a vast open field, into a deadly trap. There's nowhere to hide, no unnecessary cuts, just pure suspense. It's the opposite of his usual claustrophobic settings. Here, danger lurks in the vastness. Many critics see this film as the origin of the modern spy genre, influencing franchises like James Bond, Mission Impossible, and Jason Bourne. The elegant, ironic hero trapped in impossible situations, solving problems with wit rather than brute force. All of it began here. By the late 1950s, Hitchcock was the undisputed master of suspense, but the 1960s would establish him as a revolutionary, capable of reinventing himself when no one expected him to surprise anymore. It all began with Psycho, 1960, a film that changed the history of horror and suspense forever. Hitchcock became obsessed with Robert Bloch's novel, and when no studio wanted to finance it, considering it too sordid and risky, he decided to fund it himself. He shot it in black and white to cut costs and use his TV series crew, but also to soften the violence in the famous shower scene. The blood, made from chocolate syrup, was less graphic without color. The black and white visuals also enhanced the eerie, almost documentary tone, evoking his older thrillers and proving that a simple play of light and shadow could be more disturbing than any vivid color. The result was shocking. A brutal murder, a plot full of deception, and a narrative twist unheard of at the time. Janet Leigh, presented as the protagonist, is killed halfway through the film, and the iconic shower scene became one of the most famous scenes in film history.
In the first place, we had in it the murder of a woman in a shower, of a nude woman. Now, as you know, you could not take the camera and just show a nude woman being stabbed to death. It had to be done impressionistically. So it was done with little pieces of film. The head, the feet, the hand, parts of the torso, everything, you see. I think in that scene there were 78 pieces of film in about 45 seconds.
Psycho was a massive box office success and redefined psychological horror. Norman Bates, the shy and disturbed owner of the Bates Motel, remains one of cinema's most complex and unforgettable villains.
It reminds me of when I made Psycho. A man was arrested in Los Angeles for murdering 3 women. He is alleged to have said that he murdered the 3rd woman after seeing Psycho. So I was called by the newspapers for a comment, and my only question was, what film did he see before he murdered the 2nd woman? And perhaps before he murdered the 1st woman, maybe he'd just drunk a glass of milk.
After Psycho's impact, Hitchcock once again challenged audiences with The Birds, 1963. Inspired by a short story by Daphne du Maurier, the film imagines a coastal town where, without warning, birds begin to attack humans in increasingly violent waves. For Hitchcock, the unsettling part wasn't explaining why the birds attacked, but showing what happens when nature, unpredictable and silent, turns against us. The film pushed the special effects of its time to the limit. Thousands of real birds were trained and released on set, blended with mechanical models and camera tricks. The shoot was so exhausting that Tippi Hedren, the lead actress, endured actual bird attacks during the bedroom scene, which was filmed over 5 consecutive days. Hitchcock ended the 1960s working on various projects, some more recognized than others. Torn Curtain, 1966, brought together Paul Newman and Julie Andrews in a Cold War espionage thriller. The tension between Hitchcock and Newman became legendary. The director had little patience for Newman's modern acting methods. Still, the film includes memorable sequences, like the murder of a Stasi agent on a farm, an uncomfortable, drawn-out scene that highlights how hard it really is to kill someone, stripping away the glamour often associated with cinematic violence.
Look, she's wearing my tie.
After decades of reinventing suspense, manipulating audiences, and obsessing over every shot, Alfred Hitchcock entered the 1970s as a living legend, but also as a man who, like many of his characters, was beginning to feel the weight of time, guilt, and loneliness.
How'd you like my tie?
By then his health was in decline. He suffered from arthritis, heart issues, and had gained even more weight, making each shoot physically exhausting. In 1972, Hitchcock decided to film in his native country for the first time in over 2 decades. The result was Frenzy, one of his last great works, raw and twisted. Set in contemporary London, the story follows an innocent man accused of being a serial killer who strangles women with neckties. It was Hitchcock's most explicit and violent film. After years of censorship in the 1950s and 60s, he could now show what he once had to imply: the brutality of crime and the morbid curiosity of a city fed by gossip.
Open, okay.
In 1976, Hitchcock shot his final film, Family Plot. Unlike the grim tone of Frenzy, this one returned to a more playful style, a blend of dark comedy and mystery. The story follows a fake medium and her taxi driver boyfriend who get tangled in a web of kidnappings, stolen diamonds, and multiple deceptions. While Family Plot doesn't reach the heights of his classics, it reflects the irony and macabre humor that had always defined him. Sick and increasingly frail, Hitchcock fought to finish the film while staying true to his style. By the late 1970s, Hitchcock spent most of his time at his home in Bel Air, surrounded by scripts, photographs, and memories. His circle had grown very small: Alma, a few loyal friends, and his daughter Patricia. He read the newspapers daily, jotted down ideas in notebooks, and loved to retell old on-set jokes. Until the very end, he kept his biting sense of humor. He once said, "My biggest fear is dying in the middle of a boring scene."
Mr. Cabot is temporarily indisposed, but we'll be back with some of his cutting remarks after this word from our sponsor.
On April 29, 1980, Alfred Hitchcock died in his sleep at age 80, leaving behind more than 50 films that continue to be studied frame by frame. Today, when a viewer senses something move in the shadows, hears a creaking door, or suspects a glance, hides something sinister, Hitchcock is still there, reminding us that the most effective fear needs no monsters, only our imagination.